There's a reason there's not 20 YC startups that have successfully penetrated X market. We've just had to say no to a lot of things. We're like, no, how do we get smaller, basically? Which is kind of an ironic thing to say when you're trying to build a multi-billion-dollar business. We were searching for sort of the soft underbelly of this marketplace. They were sort of holding the keys to the kingdom. We are on the cusp of just 1,000 flowers blooming, reimagining services with that sort of mindset. We are in a moment where the opportunity is not to incrementally improve what's being done there, but it is to deliver a multi-X, 5-10X better product much more scalably and efficiently.
You're listening to the Startup Podcast. This is an educational episode.
Hi, I'm Yaniv Bernstein.
I'm Brandon Weber.
Every founder gets a version of the same advice. Don't pick a fight with an entrenched industry. The incumbents have the relationships, the regulatory cover, the deep accounts. You'll bleed out trying. But some of the most interesting companies of the last decade got built ignoring that advice. They kicked a path that everyone said was unwinnable, and they won it anyway. Brandon Weber is co-founder and CEO of Nava Benefits, a Series C funded AI-powered health benefits brokerage. Before Nava, Brandon co-founded Hightower in 2013, a commercial real estate startup that, after merging with VTS in 2016, grew to run over half of all the office buildings in the United States today. Brandon seems to have perfected a repeatable founder playbook for breaking into entrenched industries and how AI is changing what's possible, all of which, of course, makes him the ideal person to take us through today's topic. Brandon, welcome to the Startup Podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm pumped to be here.
What are the characteristics of a broken market that, as a startup founder, you can consider exploiting?
For us, commercial real estate, now healthcare, I think there's a couple of big things that I think about. Number one is the status quo is bad and getting worse year over year. It's not sort of marginally improving year over year, but slowly, it's actually getting worse. Where the constituents would say this is a problem that feels to me. I'm looking for the burning platform opportunity because I know how hard the work is going to be ahead. We're focused on huge markets too. I mean, that sort of my starting point is if it's going to take a long time to go make an impact, we have to just deeply believe that there is so much running room inside of that market that it's going to be worth chopping wood for as long as it's going to take. And for me, in moving into healthcare specifically, I wanted those two things and a problem that I could look at sort of my daughter and my grandkids and say, I'm working on a problem that matters. There's a common thread through many of those industries that are broken and worthy of attacking. Many of them are sort of relationship driven or owned industries where distribution is the value proposition in some ways. It's no sort of coincidence that I've been effectively working in brokered industries for the last 18 years of my career. And that creates a different sort of dynamic when it comes to how do we actually go and attack that industry and attack that space. The status quo is actually the end customer is not the one being served. There are the middlemen inside of that marketplace that are actually the ones that are serving each other. And we'll get into maybe how you go and attack that marketplace, but where there's a very big gap between the sort of constituents that are making the money or taking the toll inside of that market and the actual end consumer or end customer is where I get really excited.
It feels like the key issue here is distribution. In a sense, the market's been captured by those middlemen who primarily serve their own interests, but that it's not so easy to just say, oh, okay, healthcare is broken, so I'm going to launch a better healthcare organization and all the customers will come to me. Because what seems to be missing, I suppose, is distribution.
Yeah, 100%. Healthcare is the most obviously broken marketplace that I think any one of us could think of. When you just point to a marketplace, which one feels obviously broken or rife with problems to solve, it's healthcare. When you double click on the healthcare marketplace, you realize it's like a 5-layer cake of constituents sitting between the healthcare consumer and the medical professional that's providing healthcare. There's a real complexity there in unwinding what each of those constituents or stakeholders are doing and attacking the right one. The broker in these marketplaces where they're distribution driven, they really control the flow of goods and distribution of solutions and the opportunity to change the way in our world, where the way that the broker actually works was sort of the big opportunity, the big unlock. They were sort of holding the keys to the kingdom in terms of how the healthcare buyer actually accesses vendors and solutions around health plans. And then they were also holding the keys to the kingdom around the digital health and healthcare innovators actually go to market and get their products in front of the customer. So the attack point there was like, how do we reimagine that layer specifically to unblock what is a very unhealthy marketplace dynamic in terms of healthcare?
Let's come back to healthcare, but I'm very keen to, I guess, generalize and abstract some of your learnings. And of course, you've already done this once before in commercial real estate with Hightower, later VTS. And I guess I'm interested to learn, because that one's gone full arc. You have effectively succeeded in disrupting the existing industry. So I'd love to hear a little bit about what you learned from there as well.
There's a little bit of there's kind of two different entry points into those marketplaces. And, with Hightower and VTS, I started out as a practitioner in that industry. I was in commercial real estate brokerage. I was working at one of the largest brokerage firms in the country. And so I was a practitioner that was solving my own problem. I saw the writing on the wall. I was like, there is no way that this marketplace is going to be run on spreadsheets for the next decade. And I saw an opportunity to build a better operating system connecting the supply side, the commercial landlords, to their tenants. And that gave me an on-ramp into building the technology, because I was an insider. I was a practitioner. I had access there. And so there's always, as the founders that are listening, there is, and I think we're at a beautiful time for practitioners to solve their own problems. AI gives or lowers the barrier to entry to get into building a technology solution if you understand the actual workflows. I intrinsically understood just sort of the day-to-day work deeply in my first startup. And that was probably the most important thing for me to do in building Nava. We decided to go full stack, whereas VTS was a technology platform serving the marketplace. Nava is an sort of AI native benefits brokerage sitting on top of a technology platform. And number one, it's just like had to go super deep on understanding the ins and outs of how benefits in this case are designed, administered, and supported, and spent a ton of time doing that. And I think that the entry point into that was just a lot of time listening to, in this case, it was HR buyers. It was just like, how do you buy your healthcare? We got to 25 or 30 of the same answers to the same very specific questions. We started to feel like we had our finger on the pulse of like what the real problem was there. The other, I think, big thing there was we were just very, very problem first when it came to pulling the thread. Like until we got to what is the most acute problem that the HR buyer and the member have, and we're just feeling that very consistently, we didn't really start building anything. It was just a lot of listening. That was the starting point with VTS as well.
A friend of the pod, actually, Gary Lowe, who's been on before. He is the founder of a residential real estate startup, which of course is also one of these broken industries. A lot of founders try in good faith, and very few of them actually succeed because there is that equilibrium, right? With Gary, I've talked in the past about finding that thermal exhaust port on the Death Star, that asymmetry, right? Where even a small founder who is even on the radar of the big players, that because of the structure of the industry, they can't effectively respond, right? There's sort of a vulnerability that you can exploit. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about here, right? When you're analyzing the structure of a broken industry, how do you develop that strategy and the conviction that if you put 10 years into this, there's actually a pretty good chance it's going to work, especially when you're hearing all of these people around you who are saying the incumbents are too entrenched? How do you build that conviction?
I think that sort of like attack point in a broken, large, and entrenched industry maybe counterintuitively needs to be narrower than you would think. So like that, the exhaust port is, I think, a good maybe like analogy. And with VTS, it was, can we replace this leasing activity report? It was literally the first product that we built. It was one spreadsheet in this giant sort of workflow of commercial leasing and commercial asset management and whatnot. And that was the starting point from which we were able to grow and build a lot more capabilities, and ended up building like a totally comprehensive platform. In this case, in the sort of entrenched insurance brokerage market, we had to get very niche when it came to our starting point of who we're going to serve, the HR teams and the buyer that we're going to serve. And we became sort of maniacally focused on Nava is the virtual benefits department in a box for employers with 50 to 500 employees. And that was where you've got a couple of HR people. You can't hire a benefits person, but Nava, you don't have to. My sort of generalizable advice or maybe learning here in two very different sort of like markets and even strategies. One is tech-enabled services, one is tech. We're just like narrowing the aperture and being like aggressively aggressively narrow on focus and niche, whether it's use case or target market. That is, I think, an approach that has served us well, that has been counterintuitive. We just had to say no to a lot of things. We're like, no, how do we get smaller, basically? Which is kind of an ironic thing to say when you're trying to build a multi-billion-dollar business. So how do we get smaller? How do we shrink our target market initially so that we can stand out more from these massive, massive incumbents that have been around there forever, that sort of own the distribution channel? We can cut the amount of time it takes for us to get to, we're 20 times better than that traditional incumbency market at this one specific sort of set of use cases for this very focused audience or buyer.
I think that's good general startup advice beyond just any of this, right? We talk a lot on this podcast about having a narrow wedge, and in a sense, pressure is force divided by surface area. So you want that very fine surface area so you can really concentrate your efforts. You mentioned brokers, and that what you were building with Nava is a brokerage. Without understanding the details, what it sounds like to me is you're saying, well, the aim isn't to try to fully disrupt the existing structure, because that requires just too much force, more than a startup has. You need to find a way of fitting yourself into the existing structure and then, in a sense, disrupting it from within.
I think that's a great insight and a great call out. I think there's a couple of things so I think that is true. And I think particularly in healthcare too, where it is the 5-layer cake, there's so many intermediaries and stakeholders that it sort of, this healthcare marketplace is sort of formed the like Gordian knot of like marketplaces, where it is quite difficult to say, we are going to disintermediate the healthcare marketplace in America with X solution. We were searching for sort of the soft underbelly of this marketplace where we go insert value into the value chain, but work inside of, in America, the insured employer-sponsored healthcare marketplace that we live in. And I think with brokerage, what we believed in pretty early, we studied a lot of the products and solutions that failed in the marketplace, was that one of the things that is not going to change in the next decade is the HR buyer's reliance on a human, a trusted advisor, a broker, to guide them through this process, to be the throat to choke if something goes wrong. This is healthcare. It's the second largest budget line item for every employer in America today. Costs are going up and complexity is going up. So we were like, how do we incept into that vessel, which is the brokerage relationship, the capabilities that we thought were missing, which is how do you moneyball that healthcare spend, and how do you provide average consumers, the employee and their family members, with personalized guidance, support, advocacy at scale. So that was the way that we did it. And I think we were like, we are not going to convince healthcare consumers to move outside of the employer-sponsored healthcare regime and structure and the insurance structure. There's a trail of many dead bodies of awesome value propositions that just decided that they could build better rails initially. So we were like, we can innovate from inside of that stakeholder, in our case, and reimagine the broker as the stakeholder for change. And that's one of our mantras internally, is that this stakeholder is probably the most important sort of latent change agent in fixing healthcare, because they control, the channels between supply and demand.
So you've created a broker-shaped entity, right? So the immune system doesn't reject you, right? People come in like, okay, I need an health insurance broker. I'm an HR person. There are a number of them available, and one of them is Nava. That seems to be the best fit for me. But then on the inside, you look quite different to other brokers.
Definitely. We look totally different. And I think the sort of the opportunity and challenge that we've had is going to the HR, in our case, the HR buyer, the employers is the marketplace, and showing them what's possible when you sort of weave together the brokerage relationship with technology that can do so much more for your employees and their family members and the HR team themselves. So yeah, that's exactly right.
But I think it's really interesting, you said, and the HR team themselves. I think this is a generalized learning. When you're attacking the broken industry, like you said, a characteristic of these industries is generally there are a number of middlemen, and you call this the layer cake, right? It's not direct to consumer, because in a direct to consumer industry, consumers will generally go for the best product for them. So a broken industry by definition has these layers. You need to think, how do I create a product that is not just best for the end user, and that might be your end goal, but best for the buyer? And in your case, the buyer is not the end user, the buyer is the HR person. So I imagine if you offer the best health service, but you're a headache for HR teams, no one's going to buy it.
Full non-starter.
How do you balance that, where your end goal is to unbreak an industry, but your way in has to be through the established distribution channels.
The business feels a little bit like a B to B to C business. It's not. I mean, it is, at the end of the day, the consumer is the customer of all of the people in our supply chain, right? The employee is, and their dependents are the customer of the HR team. They effectively pay for that health insurance and healthcare through premiums and contributions in their compensation. And the HR team is the client of the broker. And so we can never lose sight of the fact that in order to get to the member, we have to convince the HR buyer that we are a better solution than that 100-year-old brokerage firm who's, this is an industry that trades on brand. They're like, you're not going to get fired if you hire Willis Towers Watson or pick one of these very large traditional brokerage firms. The HR teams have historically been buying relationships. That is what they're buying. They're buying relationships and people. And what has made us successful is we've enabled the HR team to say, hey, if I buy a different relationship, in this case, Nava, I actually get an entirely new set of sort of capabilities and value proposition that I didn't even know was possible inside of this brokerage relationship. In our world, it's about automating the benefits work for them, and it's about providing a personalized healthcare concierge and insurance concierge for their employees. And so that is the sort of like distribution channel is through our great brokerage team and our producer team. And then the value proposition is sort of like new categories of value through that distribution channel. And I think that's something that's roughly generalizable. And I think we are on the cusp of just 1,000 flowers blooming in this sort of reimagining services with that sort of mindset. We are going to continue to move through the channel of I trust that person and I'm hiring a person and a relationship and a set of expertise. But when I double click on it, if there's so much more behind that is being delivered increasingly by agentic AI technology, whatever sort of headline you want to use from the technology standpoint.
Going back to your point about picking that narrow entry point, What was the process you used to decide who you were going for?
This is going to sound very obvious, but maybe it's generalizable. We started just by, I think we talked to 200 HR leaders across the spectrum of employer size. And really focused on a handful of very open-ended questions in terms of how do you do what you do? Who do you rely on? Where are the key pain points for you? Inside of that large sample size, we started to see patterns emerge inside of this very specific niche, which is they'd outgrown the like PEO, small, micro kind of technology solutions that are getting dumped into this. And they didn't have any budget for a specific department called benefits. And so they were kind of winging it. And it turned out they were spending like $2 million winging it. And they were getting the B and C team at these traditional brokerage firms who couldn't afford to provide them with a suite of consultants around them because the business wasn't large enough. And so I think it was talking to a lot of folks across a large spectrum. In our case, it was like, where inside of this employer sponsored marketplace are we going to focus? And then we continued to hear the sort of 10 out of 10 pain points inside of this very specific kind of niche of HR teams. Then it's like yielding, like, what are the primitives there that are coming out in those conversations? And we had several primitives that were coming out in those conversations, trying to support my employees. I don't understand this stuff. We don't have a team focused on that domain. And I feel like I'm getting the sort of the B team when it comes to the traditional brokerage firm. Yeah.
What makes me think of is the classic innovator's dilemma. In the sense, what you've said is you have gone for the bottom end of the market that is not fully self-serve. The bottom end of the broker service market, they get the B and C team because these customers are not worth as much to the brokers, right? They're smaller customers, they're less profitable. And that means that they are somewhat defenseless against you structurally. And that's when we talk about that Wedge on the Death Star, right? You come in, you are taking away their least valuable customers, and that's your foothold. You can take away their worst customers for them, and they become your best customers, and you service the hell out of them, right? Because you have the advantage, the technology, the ability to move fast. As you build out the capability of your platform, you can slowly move up market, and the same playbook, that Innovator's dilemma playbook, can work again and again because you're still picking off their least valuable remaining customers and so on. Is that kind of how you think about it?
I think that's a great frame. I think that and if you watch Nava's progression over the last 5 years, we started in that 50 to 100 employees submarket, built out the core foundation that was working at 100 to 250. And now sort of our largest client is now 6,000 lives. And so we're starting to move up. And I think maybe to build off of that, I think what's been powerful is the automation and the software that we're building for that small market, because as we move up market, they just have more complexity, more employees asking more questions, more money. I think the ROI is compounding up market. The one addendum I would say is that in our case, the traditional incumbents have been fighting tooth and nail to preserve that market. Because inside of our ICP of 50 to 500 lives, that's like 40% of the total employees in America. So this isn't like a small, like initial SAM that we're going to have to expand out of if we want to go build a business. It's actually, it's 40% of the American employee population. The challenge is they don't have the ability to sort of like scale down to that market effectively with people. And so we're moving up as as our capabilities build out and we've got more wins. I think the other just general thing, that the headwind that you have to be prepared to run through is so much about this traditional market where incumbents rule. Maybe there's a relationship component. It's just like moving through the sort of the morass of like brand affinity and brand awareness, right? Like, can you trust Nava with, your $7 million healthcare decision that, oh, by the way, has gone up by 11% year over year over the last 3 years? And so I think a lot of I think in markets that look like this, doubling down on just creating super fans and having those super fans tell their story has been the jet fuel for us in moving up market. And I compare and contrast this to my last company, where the amount of emphasis and time we spend on having our clients tell their stories and tell the story of like, I used to work with this $60 billion insurance brokerage firm, and now I work with Nava, and here are the concrete ways that it's changed the lives of my employees. That has been the sort of the jet fuel that has enabled us to sort of penetrate that thick, leathery, surface of like brands and relationships industries.
A quick break to talk about domains. Here's the thing, if you get your startup domain right, you never think about it again, but get it wrong and it's a stone in your shoe for years. My previous startup was called Circular, but circular.com, of course, not available. So we registered nowcircular.com. And honestly, it was a bit of a nightmare. People couldn't find us. They weren't sure what we were called. They went to the wrong site. We kept debating internally whether to rebrand. We never did, and the distraction, well, it never stopped. I wish we'd known about .tech, the top-level domain created specifically for technology companies. When the .coms were taken, we just added now to make something work. But if I'd looked at .tech back then, I could have secured a strong, memorable domain. One that clearly told the world we were building a technology company. No weird prefixes, no creative misspellings, just circular.tech. So learn from my mistake. Go to your favorite registrar, grab a banger.tech domain that really tells the world who you are, and then forget about it. After all, you've got a company to build. This is maybe a good time to pivot to the advantages that tech in general, and because we're recording this in May 2026, AI in particular, confer to a startup. Like you said, these broken industries are generally human mediated and middleman mediated. You mentioned just before that part of the challenge is that these big brokerages can't service these customers as well as they should with people because it's not scalable. And so, of course, as anybody listening to this podcast knows, the advantage of software in general and AI in particular is the scalability of service that you can provide. So what's your journey been like? And again, you can talk about Nava, also VTS and your general observations, but how is technology specifically leveraged to allow you, once you've, in a sense, inserted yourself into the structure of the marketplace, to outcompete?
It's almost been the tale of two companies. Honestly, like Nava was founded pre-ChatGPT 3.5 when the toolkit was mobile SaaS software, the kind of the technology toolkit of a decade ago. And then generative AI and now sort of agentic AI are really kind of enabling us to completely reimagine what's possible. And I think that the service industries are going to be probably the most profoundly transformed over the next 5 years, because as you said, agentic AI enables us to deliver service as software and actually, most importantly, deliver delightful service as software. I think we've always had to take just like such a hit on quality of experience and on humanity in the sort of traditional approaches to how do you tech enable a service. And we're in a moment where like we are delighting consumers of healthcare every single day, and it's software doing it. And that's a beautiful thing. So I think the thing that we have sort of seen, we basically, post ChatGPT 3.5, we're like, we have to rebuild everything with this as our sort of core modality. And I think when we look at the service delivery on a given client, the benefits service calendars, how we think about it, probably about 80 to 85% of the actual work that is being done by our organization will be done as well or better by our agents. And that's just the nature of their work. This is paper pushing. This is data manipulation. This is answering deterministic questions. This is building deliverables, et cetera. So I think there's this just new superpower that we all have, which is truly just radically improving the sort of the guts of how service is delivered, and then enabling the folks at our company to do what people do best, which is build relationships, spend a lot of time on strategy, everything that requires an in-person or a Zoom. We should be well prepared for that, deliver context, be a true advisor. So that has been the sprint for the last 3 years at Nava. It's like we have sort of three personas that we think about. We're agentic member advocacy. So how do you or your family or kids get access to the right health and insurance and benefits advice at the right time, point you to the right doctors and whatnot. Agentic benefits admin. So never have to hire a benefits specialist again. You got one with Nava. So infinitely scalable, working on all the back office tasks, both for our own service teams, but also for HR teams. And then consulting. And so optimizing that spend, which is it's a Rubik's Cube of vendors and strategies when it comes to how do I build a health plan and move through that process of shopping for healthcare much more effectively and save money in the process. So I think that's the way that we have sort of attacked the problem and then moving our licensed professionals sort of up the value chain.
So first of all, this term services software, which we've touched on in a couple of previous episodes of this podcast.
Yeah.
I love the term, but I love the concept. I'd love you to perhaps explain what you mean by services software and how you're actually implementing it.
Yep.
And maybe a sort of a follow-up question that I'll front load is about sort of human in the loop. Again, you're working in a regulated environment. You talked about your licensed professionals. How do you create this, I guess, cybernetic human AI system that services customers well, that is compliant, and that also buyers feel comfortable with?
I'll start with, I think there's definitely this progression that is happening from sort of chatbot to assistant to agent. And depending on what context you are in, there's sort of varying stops in, frankly, what task you are working on. There's various stops on that journey. The way that we started with the benefits experience for employees and their family members in our journey. And, today about 90% of that volume is handled entirely by our AI advocate. About 10% of that is escalated to a human benefits advocate. I think for us, it started with sort of where can we determine whether the answer is correct or not, and be able to build evals to prove or disprove that. And so we focused on the tasks that were very deterministic initially. And so you look across the 100 tasks that we do across a year, there are many of those that are just very fact pattern based, like fill out this carrier fulfillment form. We need to do this compliant check if you are in California on this week. And so those are tasks that we can build an agent to do at a very high accuracy rate. We can evaluate whether that is accurate. And there are also tasks that if there's a failure, you can actually solve the failure without there being a repercussion, on the customer or the end consumer. For the member, it's like helping the member answer any questions they have related to their benefits, choose their own benefits plans for their family, find a network doctors, all of those things in between, and sift through mountains of data on your health plan information and documents and benefits guides to go do that. And then what we're picking off now is just increasingly sort of moving up the value chain for our service team, our service professionals, on the deliverables that we are creating for HR teams and the renewal, the administration of the benefits plan process. That's sort of like the walk that we think about. And along the way, we've got, I think we're very much in that sort of moving from assistant to agent that is doing the work and getting approval from our client managers, client success team, or the HR team. And all of the big consequential stuff, like we're about to make a renewal decision. We are evaluating these two different insurance carriers, and here's what the data tells us. Those are sort of deeply human in the loop. I don't anticipate us sort of moving out of human in the loop there, because the human is also presenting the results of that to the client. So that's kind of how we think about like the sort of the cutoff points. We look at what's possible here. You see the opportunity to just delete a massive amount of work for our own internal teams. And it's the kind of work that they're both sort of less capable of and more error prone. and know what likes to do. They want it off their plate.
It's worth double clicking on that idea. You do have licensed agents. You do have certified industry professionals. So you are a genuine brokerage in some sense, right? And
Not in some sense, we are exactly a genuine brokerage. Yeah. Yeah.
right. I suppose that the idea is you can provide a much higher quality of service and be much more scalable. And ultimately, I suppose, also get better margins than your competitors because of your ability to automate and scale those professionals. And I think that's really important. Again, in this, going back to the idea of you want to have a business that is the right shape, that won't be rejected by the immune system, right?
Yeah.
You haven't said, hey, you know what? Like, brokers are stupid. We don't need that stuff. We're going to just create, pure SaaS. It's going to be amazing. You said, we're taking an existing structure, the brokerage. It may not be optimal, but that's how it is, right? And we are going to hire some of the best brokers. We are going to enable them with software and scale them with software so they can service ultimately more and more clients to a higher and higher standard compared to brokers and competing companies.
Exactly right. Yeah.
And I think that is a generalizable learning, isn't it? There is definitely this kind of judo move where you have to go with the momentum of your industry rather than fighting it.
100%. I think you need to make a determination, which is in our case, like there was a very early decision that we made, which was like, how important is the human capabilities and trust building a relationship of the broker? Like, is that a thing that we should attack or a thing that we should run off of? We 200 HR leaders later, we're like, the broker is going to be very, very important for a very long time as all of this gets more complex. So we made that decision. That was like, how do we enable our brokerage to do all of the work around that sort of, that I think industry structure much better. I think the other thing that has been really cool about that, which is on the other side, it's proving to be a flywheel for talent for us, because it turns out the top quartile of those advisors and consultants and service professionals really don't want to spend half of their day manually futzing around with, data retrieval and extraction and peer reviewing, 42-page PowerPoint decks and whatnot. And so our sort of pitch to the back of the house, the consulting side of things, is come to Nava. We're enabling you guys to operate at the top of your license and really focus sort of where you do best, and you're going to be able to serve more clients to do it. So I think that has been that sort of the kind of the two sides of that value proposition there.
We talked about AI, and I have no doubt that your company would have been successful regardless, but I feel like your timing was good in the sense of that the model that you are describing is turbocharged by AI. And so I think for founders out there, that's why services software is suddenly becoming a term that you hear a lot, right? Which is the idea that you can take a traditional business that was very labor intensive and not completely replace that labor, that you still want that core service orientation. You still want the people, but you can 10x what those people deliver. And I think that is new, right? That in relationship-based businesses and certification-based businesses, you couldn't have the 10x, right? You couldn't massively increase productivity, but AI does enable that. And so I think, again, if we're sort of trying to generalize this into a playbook in mid 2026, we'll look at services businesses that are labor intensive and think, how can I create the modern version of that? Not necessarily in pure software, but like I said, in a sort of cybernetic system that has people and software and AI in particular working together to be much more scalable.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, lean into the industries where there are people laboring away every single day to try to get something done for the client, for the marketplace. We are in a moment where the opportunity is not to incrementally improve what's being done there, but it is to deliver a multi-X, 5-10X better product, and also do so much more scalably and efficiently.
And I think the point you made about hiring is actually very important as well, is that you can hire the best team from that industry, from that service, because the best people, first of all, like you said, don't want to be doing all the drudge work. And also, they're probably the ones who can see where the puck is headed. They don't want to be part of a dying incumbent industry. They want to be getting on board and getting the stock options in a company that represents the future of how their industry is going to run.
Yeah. I think for us, Play number one was definitely like, we have to inject the domain expertise into the company like day zero. Whether that's you have it because you're a practitioner, and that was my last company. I was solving the problems that I'd seen for 6 or 7 years. Nava, the first people that we hired were brokers and client success folks. And I think the challenge there is you have a 0 to 1 problem, right? Like, how do you go convince an industry practitioner inside of this old incumbent industry to join up with you on day zero when you have zero brand, zero value proposition, zero clients? And I think that was where we were on a search for people that agreed with us on the fundamental problem. The research that we were doing with HR teams and brokers we were spending a ton of time with. And we met our first employees on the brokerage side through some expert network calls and through insurance network folks. And they were the ones that were already like, this absolutely sucks. Like, I am sort of at my wit's end. They're equally frustrated. Bringing them in early was foundational to what we were able to do, because then you're building around them, and you're basically building around the work that you're doing. You're able to sit right next to your initial customer, which is the internal stakeholder. One of the things I love about building this business is the feedback loops that we have are insanely fast. And it is so fun to watch the eyes light up of the teams internally who are just relying on this every single day. We measure our internal engagement success as 100% daily active usage. That's what we're aiming for inside of Nava with our benefits consultants and service folks. That's where we want to be. So I think you've got to find this squeaky wheel in the industry and who agrees with you on the direction of travel. You build from them, you make them successful, and then they become your biggest super fans internally inside of the industry. And so we were looking for how do we maximize industry credibility with also a disruptive mindset? And that's hard. Those are two competing sort of axes, and then build from there.
Something I've seen in the air quite a lot at the moment, the idea of acquiring or merging with a traditional business in the space and then injecting the software and tech expertise into it. Is that something you've considered? Is it something you might do in future? What are the pros and cons of moving into an established company rather than starting from scratch, greenfields?
Yeah, you're seeing the AI enabled sort of pick a services industry roll up or pick an industry roll up company. I think we have acquired 2 businesses along the way, traditional brokerage firms where the talent aligned with sort of our vision. They were really fired up about what we were doing, and we had ideal client profiles. And so we've done both. We started organically, and then along the journey, we are actively looking for firms to roll in that believe in what we're doing. I think the pros and cons, what I would say to a founder who's thinking about big broken market, how do I jumpstart it? You want the minimum viable unit of sort of work and complexity and client base to work from. And so if you go too big on an acquisition, which it's pretty easy to raise money right now, relatively speaking, if you tell the right sort of native AI story, and you go buy too much, you buy too much complexity, you buy too much legacy culture, you buy too much sort of noise in the frequency of talent, you end up inheriting all of the headaches that come with that in your journey to make that an AI native X or whatever that frame is. So I think you're trying to go as small as you possibly can, in my opinion, initially, to be able to prove out the 10x value proposition, both for the internal stakeholders, the business, and for the customers. We sort of did that. The first broker that we hired actually had a small client base that he was able to bring with him. And so we were actually able to basically start from 0 to 1 with 15 clients that were already sort of in motion service. So I think those are the dynamics. It's a great way to start, but you want to start in my opinion, as small as you possibly can initially, so that you can get to the right answer fast and then scale quickly from there.
The one advantage you have as a startup is speed. So you don't want to slow that down. So I guess acquisition is more something you can do as you grow.
Exactly. I think that the thing that I think most founders, myself included, underestimate, we're starting to talk about services industries versus just broken industries, but let's just call it these big incumbent industries, is sort of how deeply complex the internal workflows are. how much of an onion it is to peel. There's a reason there's not 20 YC startups that have like successfully penetrated X market. As a founder, having a reverence for that complexity, like if I could tell myself, the Brandon of 5 years ago, like here's some advice, I would say like, it's going to be like 3 to 4 times or maybe more complex than you're expecting. So like sort of just know that. And as a result, that will make you want to narrow your aperture and get it right and then scale from there.
This has been a fantastic conversation. I've really learned a lot about the realities of building a business in a space like this. So for founders listening who are perhaps looking at or working in a broken industry and trying to disrupt it, what's the one bit of advice you would really love them to leave this conversation with?
It's like just deeply commit to like understanding how the work gets done, like inside the industry. Like I was the first insured broker at Nava, and I'm like, I need to get deep into the business of doing brokerage. So I think that's where you will avoid the pitfalls of this sort of surface level, understanding of how these big and sort of defendable marketplaces work.
You talked just a couple of minutes ago about respecting the complexity. And I think respect is a great word, right? First of all, even if an industry is broken and the service is not good, that doesn't mean there's not a lot of complexity and craft that goes into delivering the service within the structure of the industry. But even if it is wasted effort, the truth is you're not going to be successful if you don't understand how the industry currently works. And it's not run by idiots, right? Which means that there is a lot of subtlety, a lot of nuance, and you must respect the industry before you can disrupt it. I actually think that's a really great call out. And you can't respect it if you don't understand it. Brandon Weber, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the Startup Podcast. If people want to follow you, are you online? Do they want to get in touch? Where's the best place to find out what you're up to?
I'm on Twitter, Brandon G. Weber on Twitter, but go to navabenefits.com and you can see what we're up to. Those are probably the 2 best places to find me.
And of course, if you're an employer in the United States and looking for a healthcare benefits platform, then Nava Benefits is the place to.
You got it.
This episode of the Startup Podcast was brought to you by Warp Development. I know a lot of you rely on dev agencies to help build your product. Problem is, a lot of these agencies suck. Ask me how I know. I've been looking for one that I can really endorse, and I have finally found one. Warp Development are the powerhouse behind countless successful startups and enterprises for over 22 years. They have over 100 experts who don't just code, they solve business problems alongside you. From custom software to AI consulting, Warp Development delivers results that move your business forward. And they're in your time zone. They have offices in Australia, the United States, and South Africa, so you get local support with global expertise. Are you ready to build something that matters? Visit warpdevelopment.com. That's warpdevelopment.com, and mention the Startup Podcast for a free consultation.